So
So
I hear you were reading about Apple stock.
yeah, so I mean, to get back to Facebook and all these tech companies that are tanking right now, Apple stock is being hit really hard right now. And what's fascinating about it is there's been this whole debate around the iPhone 10s. And are they going to improve the Apple stock or not? Well, the answer is absolutely not. So everybody thought the 10, the 10s, the 10R, all of these phones are supposed to be bringing in a ton of gold for Apple, especially since they're so expensive. But it turns out that's actually what's hurting them. So just last week, there were some suppliers that supply mostly for iPhone. They came out and said, hey, we're not going to hit our forecasted expectations. And so their stocks were lowered. But people knew, well, 90% of that supplier 90% of their stock goes into iPhones. And so not only did those companies uh, drop, but
Tank.
also so did Apple. In fact, people were yelling and screaming about it last week, and all the Apple deniers were saying, "No, no, it's not true. These companies aren't directly tied to it. It could be anything." And then just this week, Apple admitted that they have dropped their forecasted quantities by 30% for
Oh my.
all iPhone 10s. So all models are affected. The 10s Max, the 10R, all of them have been dropped significantly.
Well,
So
that's crazy
yeah.
because Christmas is coming up, and I know a lot of people are excited about buying their loved ones an iPhone 10.
So interestingly, it's not the United States demand that has dropped. It's actually outside the United States
Mm-hmm.
where there appears to be a lot more competition from Android. China was a big area where at first Apple, when they got in there, just boomed like crazy because it was a prestige phone to have in China. Well, now there's so many knockoffs and so many other great phones that you can get in China. People just aren't shilling out the $1,000 to have a 10R, right? Like,
And I'd be curious from our Chinese listeners, if you've used both Android and iOS in Chinese, like is it a little more integrated in the Chinese software for Android, or is does iOS do a better job, right?
it would be fascinating to see if there is a big difference as far as looking at Chinese characters versus all the other alphabets that are out there. So another thing that was interesting is Goldman Sachs, who is famous that when they make a prediction, when they say something, the whole stock market follows. And it was just today they actually downgraded their stock valuation. And they said this about the iPhone 10s and also Apple's premium price tag that they put on it. And this is what they said, quote, the laboratory of the market now points to Apple being at the limit of their price premium for the iPhone. In our experience with mobile phones, when pricing power is lost, consumer technology companies tend to lose margins or market share or both. And I think we definitely saw it with some very powerful brands in the past. You had BlackBerry that once
Hmm.
dominated. You had Nokia, which once
Oh yeah.
dominated. Sony Ericsson, which once dominated. So I think we could see. I wouldn't say the sun is setting on Apple, but it's definitely getting dimmer. And I don't think it's going to be quite the prestige device that we're used to it being.
You throw an apple up, it comes right back down, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It really is shocking how low the stock is, though. I mean, I think it was like 232 or something just a few weeks ago, and
It was.
today I looked at it and it was like in the 180s. I mean,
When I
50
looked at it.
bucks off.
Yeah, so I checked it today at my lunch break and it was at 178 and a half.
Oh my
And then
gosh.
I came back 5 minutes later and it was 177.4. So it
Holy.
was doing the downward drop
Oh.
while I was writing this and preparing for the podcast. So um but what's interesting is Apple's not alone. As we previously said, Facebook is dropping. They've all dropped approximately 20%. So
But
You know,
Just,
this may not, you could say this is just an industry trend, not an Apple trend.
well, I'm surprised that the 10R isn't doing better in India and in the international markets because it's a little bit cheaper, yeah?
It's a little bit cheaper, but compare it to their options that they have. You could get
Hmm.
a 10R for what, 800 bucks, or you could get a OnePlus, 6T that's sitting there at 500 bucks.
Yeah.
So it's significantly less, and it's pretty much the same phone. Well, you could argue that it's not as waterproof and it doesn't have the Apple prestige. It's not as snappy as Apple software, but it's got double the RAM. It's got all these great features at a much more affordable price. And I think that's what's happening. I think these emerging markets don't want to spend that much money on a luxury item.